Thank you so much for joining this info session for the LEF Moving Image Fund for pre-production and early development grant opportunities that we have coming up. Um, we are Jen Carmel. I'm Jen Carmel, the program director of the LEF Foundation, and I'm here with Matthew LaPaglia, who's the program officer. We are going to be walking everyone through the info session today. And this is going to be about an hour, including time for questions at the end. And as we're, beginning to move through, feel free if you would like to, since there aren't very many opportunities to connect in shared space like this, to share in the chat your name and location just to get a sense of who else is here, but also no pressure if you don't want to do that. We are very happy to be offering live cart captions available, which you can turn on under the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom menu. And the info session today is being recorded, so we can share this recording afterwards on our website and also share with all of you afterwards as registered participants. And you're welcome to keep your cameras on or off during the session. We just ask that you mute your microphones during the presentation part of the session. We'll pause the recording before we start the Q&A at the end. And we will also be sharing a link to the presentation recording and detailed version of these slides with all of you. So there's no need to write everything down that you see on screen. It's fine to just listen. And yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to save them for the end, or you can put them in the chat and we will get to them. So I'm happy to move on to the next slide here, which is an introduction to LEF and to the Moving Image Fund. So the LEF Moving Image Fund is a program of the LEF Foundation, which is a small private family foundation that has offices in California and New England. And both Matthew and I work for the New England office of LEF. We at New England have a focus on supporting the creation of new work by independent documentary filmmakers who are living and working in this region. And also, we want to broaden recognition for their work both locally and nationally. So, since 2001, when the Moving Image Fund was started, LEF has awarded over $5.5 million in funding and over 500 grants to filmmakers. And that remains our main focus here. So, with that, I'm happy to pass it on to Matthew.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everyone for being here on this Thursday afternoon. I'm going to start off by just sharing the Moving Image Fund eligibility and then the funding criteria as well. So first up with eligibility, LEF supports feature-length documentary and nonfiction cinema, and we define feature length as 40 minutes or more. As far as residents, the director and or primary creative producer must reside in one of the 6 New England states. Creative control projects must not be commissioned or work for hire, and the director producer creative team must have creative control of the project. Students, projects with directors or producers enrolled in high school, undergraduate or master's degree programs at the time of application are ineligible for the opportunity. As far as format, multi-channel or installation work is not considered for the Moving Image Fund, and 501c3 fiscal sponsorship. If you're awarded a grant, you will need a confirmed fiscal sponsor, but you don't need one to apply for the opportunity. So that can come later down the line. And then if you're a prior grantee, we do require a final report to be on file for you to apply for further funding. So if you have an outstanding grant without a final report, just try to get that to us as soon as you can if you're planning to apply. And then lastly, we'll talk more about this in detail, but for pre-production, the current work sample is required. And for early development, 2 past work samples are required. Current work samples are not accepted. And like I said, we'll go over that in more detail soon. So all of the Moving Image Fund applications are evaluated on four criteria that have remained, I think, the same throughout the Moving Image Fund history. And those are quality of cinematic form and technique, originality of filmmaker's voice, vision, point of view, resonance and power of the core idea, story, and feasibility of production. So questions to be asking kind of around each of these criteria. For quality of cinematic form and technique, how is your image making process meaningfully relating to the project's core ideas and questions? For originality, a filmmaker's voice, vision, and point of view, what is the unique perspective that you have on this subject matter? And then further, uh, how will your project contribute to what might be an existing dialogue or an area of understanding about these things? For resonance and power of the core idea or story, how will your project provoke questions for individual or for collective reflection? And then lastly, feasibility of production. Is your proposed timeline, budget, team all sort of aligned to achieve what you want? So with that, we'll move on to what is or isn't a good fit for the Moving Image Fund. This is a question we get all the time. And while LEF is open to a diversity of styles, modes, approaches, all sorts of things when it comes to nonfiction film, there is often a type of project that tends to more strongly align with those funding criteria. Um, First being nonfiction filmmaking or documentary cinema as creative expression. Um, the big thing here is a creative voice. LEF has always been drawn to a strong creative voice in each project. So that is kind of the top line thing there for what makes something a good fit. Uh, Second, artistic risk taking and experimentation with both form and with content. Uh, LEF is usually looking for works that are bold, heartfelt, sometimes provocative, and often challenging in terms of style and in terms of substance. And LEF is a, original funder, so we support New England-based filmmakers, but we're not only interested in New England stories. So any topic or subject matter anywhere in the world, broad or personal, are welcome to apply for this. And then lastly, all levels of experience from first time to more experienced filmmakers. LEF is really committed to this support over time for the New England ecosystem of filmmakers, whether you're brand new to it or whether you've been part of it for a long time. All are sort of welcome to apply for the Moving Image Fund, and we don't prioritize or deprioritize any filmmakers based on support in the past. So, what is not a good fit for the Moving Image Fund? On the other side of things, first and foremost, filmmakers and projects that don't meet the Moving Image Fund eligibility requirements. Second, proposals that don't demonstrate how the project aligns with the Moving Image Fund funding criteria, which I just spoke a little bit about. Branded projects or work for hire projects on behalf of a company or organization. These are not a good fit for this opportunity. And then lastly, projects that use film or video primarily as documentation and not as cinema. And that can be things like oral history or performance documentation. Um, I think that is it here. I'm going to pass it back over to Jen to talk a bit about what is unique about LEF's process.
Thanks so much, Matthew. So, a few things that are unique about our process. One is that LEF collaborates with a group of other documentary grant makers on something called the Nonfiction Core application, which is essentially just a bunch of different documentary funders who have agreed to use the same questions with the same sort of, word or character counts to make it easier for a filmmaker to apply for multiple funds. So if you are applying for LEF, consider taking a look at the Nonfiction Core application website because that will list all of the other documentary funders that accept the core. And it might be, if they have an upcoming deadline, it could be easy to just copy and paste those answers into one of their applications as well. And LEF, even though we're a small team and Matthew and I are, the team that would be answering any questions, because we're a small regional funder, we also have the capacity to answer questions ahead of time. So after the info session today, if you still have a lingering question that wasn't answered, please don't hesitate to reach out to us over email, um, and we can follow up. If the written form of the application is a barrier for you, we also can provide an alternate way for you to apply either through a video or audio application answering the questions. So let us know if you would like to explore that as an option. We always include peer reviewers in every decision-making process. There are always going to be different perspectives involved at each round. So we accept nominations of peer reviewers from past peer reviewers and from past grantees. So you can always trust that there will be, yeah, different entry points into your work if you're applying multiple times. And a huge part of the peer review process for us is being able to have the peer reviewer evaluations and notes shared with anyone who applies afterwards on request in a phone call that either Matthew and I could host with you. If you're curious to learn more about, what were the questions that came up, what felt clear to reviewers. And so that's also a great resource to know about as an in-kind form of support that we can offer. And last, we have a few other ways that we want to be supportive to filmmakers in the region. We offer a few different fellowship programs in partnership with other organizations that you can learn more about on our website. We also have a monthly newsletter where we want to compile opportunities, whether that's offered by LEF or by other folks in arts and culture or documentary or film, that you can learn more about. So if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, feel free to sign up and check that out. And yeah, we have a few other resources on our website too. If you ever want to go to that page, it's called the Filmmaker Resources page. So I think that might be it for that. I can move on to talking a little bit about the timeline for this current cycle. So we're already, more than halfway through the year. We have already concluded the first sort of cycle that we had this year from, January through May for projects that were in production or post-production. The current cycle that is open is for pre-production and early development, and also another cycle for post-production. And those all share the same August 21st deadline. So that's the most important date to keep in mind. Applications have been open since mid-June, but it's only July 16th, so there's still more than a month left to work on an application. And after August 21st is when the peer review process begins. So for the case of pre-production and early development, we are inviting three external reviewers who are all New England-based filmmakers to join us in reviewing the applications. They will have a discussion together, and based on that discussion, they will each individually make some individual recommendations for what projects to recommend for grants in alignment with what the Left Moving Image Fund criteria are. And it's the LEF team that would make a final decision about a group of pre-production and early development grants. To make those final decisions will be sent by, we say early October here, but it's more specifically October 9th is the date that we would be letting people know. So mark that date in your calendar because you could either sign on to the grant interface, or we'll send an email to everyone too. And that's also when you'd be able to sign up for a feedback call, regardless of the decision too. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention was any activities that you are applying for support to cover should be planned for after that decision date. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're applying. We wouldn't be able to have funds for a grant sort of retroactively cover something that's already happened. And you can find what expenses you can apply for support to cover on our website. But more generally, like early development and pre-production is covering research, travel, uh, shooting, picture and sound, distribution planning, fundraising, creating a trailer, schedule and budget development, and any kind of staffing. And post-production, similarly, any kind of staffing, but also more specifically related to editing, rights, sound mix and design, color correction, transfers, all of that. Um, while post-production grants are only open to projects that have received a grant at any prior stage, um, from LEF, whether early development, pre-production, production, any or all of those. If you're applying for early development or pre-production, you can be a first-time applicant or you could be a repeat applicant. And another thing to know is maybe you've received an early development grant in the past. In that case, you could choose whether you would like to apply for a pre-production grant this round or wait to apply for production or post-production later. Um, Later this year, uh, beginning in November, that is when we are going to be opening our letter of inquiry stage for the next round of our production grants. That will have a deadline in January 2027. And the next cycle for post-production will have an application deadline in the spring in March 2027. So that's a little bit about our timeline. I think I can pass it back to Matthew now, who will share more about the grant interface.
Yes, thank you, Jen. And I think Jen mentioned very briefly the grant interface. This is just your one-stop shop for applying for funding, for viewing any previous grant support or requests for grant support, and also where you can complete any outstanding final reports that are assigned. As you can see when you log on, there are instructions for logging on, or I should say when you land on this page, there are instructions for logging on. You can also find some detailed instruction on the how to apply page of our website. So let's dive into application materials themselves. Um, Both the pre-production and application forms are pretty much identical, so we'll talk kind of about both at once. They both ask for this general information up top, things like contact info, project title, website if you have one, estimated running time. But the bulk of the application uh, is these longer answer questions and uploads. So we can go through each of these one by one. The first question is the log line of your project. This is a brief summary of the project, up to 50 words. This is succinctly what your film is about. Film summary, the next question. This is an introduction to those larger story arcs or primary questions and ideas that you are engaging with the project. Ideally, someone would read the film summary and maybe not understand every beat that will happen in the film, but more comprehensively have a sense of all that you intend the film to contain or address. Artistic approach. This is the creative vision for your project and the specific visual and audio elements you plan to use to fulfill that vision. Um, this this question is asking what it will be like to watch your film, and especially for these earlier grants, when maybe you haven't shot anything or you've only shot a little bit, this question is really important in getting reviewers to understand kind of the artistic world that you expect the film to occupy. Um, it's it's also, what makes grant applications distinct from filmmaking, right? Is because with this, we're asking you to describe everything that you would otherwise be communicating through visuals and audio. So this is a really kind of critical piece of completing an application like this for funding. The next question, topic summary. This is an optional question, but you can outline the issues, themes, the stakes as they relate to the film's cultural, historical, political, or social contexts. Connection and point of view is an opportunity to talk about the unique lens that you bring as the person making the film. And building on that, accountability and community care is an opportunity to outline your approaches to consent, transparency, and feedback with your participants and with the communities that you are engaging with through your filmmaking, both directly and indirectly. Another optional question, safety and security. How are you planning to keep your film participants and communities and filmmaking teams safe, physically, emotionally, mentally, digitally as well, from the development of the project through the distribution? The next question, accessibility. You can outline any plans to make your production and the final project accessible to deaf, blind, disabled, neurodiverse folks. It's an optional question, so we also welcome, this thinking to more organically show up in other questions like artistic approach or connection and point of view, accountability, if that is kind of built into your process. For project stage and timeline, we are just interested in, what is the current state of the project and what is the anticipated path to completion. And then key creative personnel, you can provide short bios for yourself and for the rest of the creative team. It doesn't just have to be directors or producers. It could be a cinematographer or an editor, if those folks are particularly, kind of relevant to uh, the production of the project at this point. Then next, there's this section, financial information. Jen is going to talk a little bit more about this in detail, but the questions there are funding detail, which is asking for the amount of funding received as well as funding you plan to apply for. And that can be a really important question for these earlier grants. Grant impact, how will this MIF grant further your project? And then budget summary, we're asking for your best estimates for kind of each phase of production. So you won't be needing to include a full line item budget here. Work sample information, I will kind of devote a whole slide to talking about this in a few moments. But the question here to note, in addition to the providing a link, is the work sample description. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's this section, generative AI statement, where we have an optional response, and this is sort of in coordination with updates to the nonfiction core app. We are inviting applicants who are utilizing or planning to utilize generative AI to think creatively about these technologies and also remain transparent about how they're being used and ethical in the implementations of them if you are going in that direction. So after that, previous LEF support information is the next section, just asking some questions about if you've received support in the past from LEF. And then lastly, supplementary materials. This is optional for you to include resumes, press clippings, articles, a pitch deck, anything you think might round out your application. A note is that reviewers are not required to review supplementary materials, but often if they are on the fence or have some lingering questions, these materials can be very clarifying. So with all of that, I think Jen is going to talk more in detail about the financial information and fundraising.
Thanks so much. And yeah, I think Matthew already mentioned that for pre-production and early development applications, we're not requiring a line item budget. It's so early on in the process. We don't want you all to worry about that or spend time on that, but just having a like a general sense of what you think the total project cost will be. And the way that we ask about that is just like, what's a very rough best guess estimate for how much you think you would need to cover your pre-production phase, your production phase, your post-production phase, and then any costs related to like distribution. Um, these are not anything that would be set in stone, really just meant to be a snapshot and a scenario planning, idea. And the um, maybe resources to be aware of to come up with that total. We do have a budget template that you can use if you want to just like, plug in any numbers and come up with a total that way. The International Documentary Association has a very comprehensive documentary budgeting guide on their website that could be great. It also comes with, I think, way of thinking about budget in relationship to timeline and how, if there are timeline changes that can affect your budget. And Matthew also mentioned the funding detail section, and that is essentially, you know, once you have an idea of what your total budget is, how are you thinking about the many different ways you might be able to meet that resourcing need, whether that's through some secured, confirmed funding sources already, or probably in most cases for projects that are in early development or pre-production, you might not have any secured funding yet, and that's totally awesome and fine. And LEF is excited to be one of the first supporters for your project in that case. And in that case, it's great to see if you might begin to sketch out what are some other potential documentary grants or artist grants, or even thinking outside of arts and culture. Are there other community-based grants or maybe artist residencies or labs or any other kind of resourcing strategy that you might need to apply for, in addition to maybe other fundraising strategies that you might be considering using, whether you might want to run a crowdfunding campaign online or host sort of fundraising events that invite individual donors to contribute to your work, or whether you're thinking about like a broadcast license for your work, or thinking about potential screening income coming in at the end, depending on what your distribution plan is. You can find some more ideas for potential, you know, grant resources and artist support resources on our filmmaker resources page. And yeah, essentially, for coming up with the total as well, one question we receive is like, I'm worried that reviewers will think that my budget is either too big or too small. And historically, I think what we have found is that most of the time it's great to sort of show what your plan A budget is, or the budget that you would um, say really captures what like the full cost is, including both anything monetarily, but also anything being provided in kind in terms of your time or other people's time, um, so that you can show reviewers how you're thinking about everything that's going into your project that needs to be covered, and all of the different ways that you are creatively resourcing your project. Um, I, yeah, I think, other aspects of it might include, are there, you know, care or accessibility expenses that you might want to consider for your team, or for the distribution phase of the project? Um, one other resource that can be helpful for thinking about accessibility related expenses is documentary filmmakers with disabilities, or Forward Doc. They have a resource related to accessibility expenses. And yeah, one other thing that, might not be right for every project, but there are some projects where it might make sense to consider, I'm asking my participants to spend time with me. Um, Maybe they're taking time off of work to do that. Maybe they have childcare expenses. Would it be appropriate for me to consider raising funds that would help to make it easier for my participants to participate in my project? Um, So yeah, again, that might not be the right consideration for your specific project, but just something to consider. I think that might be it for fundraising detail. And I might want to pass it back to Matthew to talk about samples.
Right. Um, so the pre-production and early development applications, the main difference between them comes down to work samples. Um, and that is sort of just based on where the project is in terms of its development. So for pre-production, we are requiring that current sample from the project that you're proposing up to 10 minutes. And for early development, no current work samples are accepted. It's just two past completed work samples. Um, so first, we'll talk a little bit about the current work sample. And these should be key moments from your project's work in progress. It can be, research footage, it can be early character sketches, even some rough scenes. Anything that is communicating your vision for the finished film. Often they'll demonstrate access to materials or to participants. Your visual treatment that is emerging for the footage and materials that you have. I mean, just generally the developing tone and style that you're going for. It's totally fine to submit a sample that is longer than 10 minutes. Maybe you have a different sample for another funder, and you're welcome to use that here. If it is longer than 10 minutes, there's just a section for you to identify which 10 minutes you would like reviewers to watch. So that could be one 10-minute chunk, or it could also be broken up across a few different moments to total 10 minutes. We do find that there can be a little bit of reviewer fatigue if you're asking them to jump around the sample too many times. So the recommendation there would be to maybe limit yourself to two or three separate moments from the sample. Um, and then lastly here for current work, it's fine if your sample is constructed entirely of archival materials. This tends to work best if those materials are providing an important texture or format to your film and to the artistic goals of that film. Sometimes those are used to demonstrate kind of the editing approach or your artistic goals and approach to presenting content in that way. As far as things to avoid for current work samples, first, fundraising trailers. These tend to try to cover too much ground rather than present the depth of a moment that we're really asking for with these samples. If you do have a trailer that you are proud of and would want to include, you are welcome to do that. We just would recommend including something longer in addition to that trailer. Crowdfunding pitch videos also not recommended for this current work sample, and slideshows of film stills as well is something to avoid here. As far as past work samples, and it's optional to include that for pre-production and then required to have two of those past work samples for early development. Um, these are meant to show past interests, past experience, as well as any potential new directions with this current project. Similarly to current work samples, it's okay to include something longer than 10 minutes if it's a completed work. It very well might be longer than 10 minutes, so you could just identify which 10 minutes you would like reviewers to watch. It's also okay for this past work to include work by other team members, not just yourself or not just the director. The question here to keep in mind for past work is just how will the new project be building on or departing from these prior works? For both of these, wherever you are including a link to a work sample, there's also a chance to include a sample description. And that section is really, really important for these early grants. Um, like I said, there tends to be, not a ton of footage to present potentially, or for early development, you're not presenting any current work. So the sample description is a really important place to contextualize what it is you are presenting to reviewers as it relates to, everything that you have written about in the proposal. Um, so thinking about maybe not just using that section to describe what it is reviewers will see in the sample, but explain why it is you've chosen those things to show them, and what that is doing to sort of marry the written proposal with the artistic vision that is coming together in a current work sample, or maybe has yet to emerge out of these past works. I think that's it for work samples. And I believe we just have a few other recommendations here before we move on.
Thank you. Um, and maybe one other, forgive me if maybe you had mentioned this, Matthew, but I just always love to emphasize this about samples because it happens so often that people think that they need to only submit exactly 10 minutes or less as their link. And I just want to share, it's always welcome to share a link to a longer sample if you already have it, or if that feels more reflective of the pacing of your work. And you can just let reviewers know, what to watch up to that 10 minutes. So I hope that that is a good, underscore of that as a recommendation. Otherwise, you know, just want to encourage you to pace yourself and, take a look at what the questions are, begin to draft things if you haven't already, so that you can have some time to go back and revise. And maybe if you want to draft responses like directly on the grant interface, you can. We usually always recommend drafting them elsewhere just in case there's any disruption to internet or, your computer dies or something like that. We want to make sure it's easy for you to, still have a copy elsewhere to plug into the application later. And in terms of maybe just how to approach like writing about your project, I think it's great to just try to be to the point and direct about what you know, what you don't know, what the process itself might reveal to you creatively. We don't want you to feel like you need to overpromise anything or to say exactly how, you think the film will end, which even if reviewers are curious about that, I think what reviewers tend to be really more interested in is how do I understand the way that this filmmaker is navigating the creative process in alignment with their own values and with their own creative interests. And maybe that's more to do with a sense of what are the questions that are really at the core of my process for me, and what values are guiding me and ideas are guiding me in navigating what's still unknown or uncertain. And yeah, thinking about how, as Matthew was sharing, like the written proposal really helps to complement the sample work that you're sharing, offering sort of that broader, bigger picture contextual overview for reviewers, and how that can really be helpful to think about strategically in terms of what do you have in terms of any sample materials yet, and how can the written proposal and the sample description specifically help point reviewers to what you want them to be mindful is included in your sample and what is yet to be included that may be pretty core to your approach that hasn't yet been developed. That's also where just thinking about the approach that if you're applying for pre-production with a current work sample, um, sharing an optional past work sample can be a really complementary way of showing, yeah, an approach that might not yet be present in your current work sample, but that you can show from a past work that you've made. Um, if you're giving yourself enough time to draft and have a full draft ready well before the deadline, that's also a great opportunity to ask for feedback from someone else, whether they've applied for a LEF grant or a film grant in general, or not. Um, we always want to encourage, peer-to-peer feedback. It can be great to just get a sense of, what is coming through from what you want to communicate about what your goals are, what's feeling unclear. And actually, since, we have everyone in this space, I just wanted to share that we would welcome if anyone wants to share that they would be open to connecting with someone else in this space today at a later point. You could feel free to share in the chat your email, and that folks could feel free to reach out to you if they want to have like a grant feedback buddy for the next few weeks. And yeah, I think that might be it for other general recommendations. I might pass it back to Matthew, who will share more specifically about post-production.
Great. Yeah. So as Jen mentioned, we have a post-production cycle that is currently open as well, in addition to the pre-production and early development. Um, Quick caveat before we talk about that is that post-production is only open to projects that have received LEF support already, so early development support, pre-production, or production. And that support would have come at a previous calendar year. So if you are someone who received production support um, just recently in May, you would be able to apply at the upcoming March deadline for post-production. Um, and that also means that if you were to receive pre-production or early development support at this current cycle, you could, in theory, apply for post-production at that March deadline as well if your project is moving very, very quickly. Um, so this is the first year that we are doing this biannual uh, application process with the intention to have these slightly quicker review turnarounds. And that first cycle, like we mentioned, summer fall cycle is open now with a deadline of August 21st. And then there's that winter spring cycle that will open in February with a deadline in late March and a decision in late May. Um, we'll continue to offer up to 6 grants throughout the year, but those are divided up between the 2 cycles. And the application forms themselves haven't changed when it comes to post-production, but we are, with this new biannual deadline, no longer requiring that letter of inquiry round for post-production, which is part of what makes these cycles a little bit quicker. Um, and if you are eligible for this post-production support, you can find an example of the application on the How to Apply page of our website, which also has some other helpful instruction. You can also reach out to Jen or to me um, if you have questions about that post-production. I think that is it for that, and we can um, we
Say
can
thank you to all of you for bearing with us through that presentation. And before, yeah, we move into questions, just sending a lot of appreciation to Matthew as well for co-facilitating with me.